Good morning, David. How are you?
Doing well. How about you, Noah?
Long response time, my guy.
Okay, I was caught off guard. Shut up.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about open source. So, for those of you who don't know what open source is, it's a way of coding that's very social. So, normally, you have two ways to write code. There's closed source and then there's open source. So, closed source is whenever it's all within the company. So, you have, a group of people inside a company and they're the only ones that can see the source code and like write it. Now, open source is where it's open to the public. So basically, if you take let's say Firefox for an example, it's 100% open sourced, meaning that yeah, the people who work for Mozilla can can make the code and write the code for Firefox, but just average programmers who are like, let's say, bored on a weekend, they can also go and contribute to it. So you go on what's called a repository, and you can contribute to it. And yeah, so it's basically like code that's open. Now, obviously, the advantages of this is that, let's say you're a small company, you don't have many resources. You can, a lot of people who are just bored programmers, they'll like code for free basically, just like as a hobby. But also the downside is that due to it being open, you also don't have all the rights over it. Meaning that, let's say if someone else wanted to use your piece of software and they wanted to modify it and make their own version, they would also be allowed to do that legally. Or if they want to take your software and like build something else on top of it. A really good example of this would be Chromium. So for those of you who don't know, it's like the base of what Google Chrome is, and basically it's open source, meaning that anyone can contribute to it and like improve it. But on the flip side, many other browsers can use it as the base for their own. So examples of this would be the new Microsoft Edge, Brave, Opera, and a few other browsers. So, David, is there anything else you would want to add to clarify it?
I think you actually covered pretty much all the bases. Basically, the TLDR form that he said, open source is basically where anyone has the ability to contribute to it, and closed source project is basically where only a company or the perpetually owner can only attribute to the product.
Yeah, and it's also important to note that inside the tech community and specifically the programmer community, open source is really like praised because one big advantage of having something open sourced, and it's something that we touched on in our last podcast, is that if you can view the source code, you can also see exactly how much and what kind of data that piece of software is collecting from you. So like you don't have to take the company that says, oh yeah, like it's safe, we respect your privacy. You can actually go in and see for yourself if it's like what it's collecting and how much it collects.
Which is a great thing. I mean, because it's open source, it means that there's no filter. You know what's going on if it's collecting the data, if it's tracking you or anything like that. Because it's open source, everything that the company is working on, you have the ability to see it and look at the code and be like, oh, okay, it's not tracking or taking my data when we're selling it or whatsoever. I think I'm gonna support that product, which is a great thing about open source because there's no filter, right?
Yeah, yeah. And also another good thing about open source is that, like I said, anyone can contribute to it, but also anyone can also use it. So meaning that whenever there's an open source project and uh you like contribute to it, you're also helping the collective good. Another example for this would once again be Chromium. For example, whenever Microsoft started working on their new Edge browser based on Chromium, What they ended up doing is that they contributed a lot of code to the Chromium project, which made the RAM management much better. But because Chromium is open source and so many other browsers use it, like Google Chrome and Brave and others, basically, whenever Microsoft added the better RAM management, not only it made RAM management better in their own Edge browser, but also inside all the other browsers that use Chromium, like Google Chrome and Brave, and all the others that use it, also their RAM management became better.
Which is what Noah said. That is true. I
Yeah.
mean, there's also the ability where a company could have a part of the project open source and part of it not open source.
Yeah, so a lot of companies do this. Google would be a very good example. So basically, because obviously if you're a company like as big as Google, you wouldn't want everything for the public to see it. Because once again, with open source, other people can use your project. So that's why, for example, Google Chrome, they only have part of it open source, Chromium. But then on top of that, they have proprietary software. So they take the open source Chromium and then they put their own proprietary software on top of it, and that's what makes Google Chrome. And a lot of companies, especially Google, Facebook, and Microsoft, they'll do this because then they kind of get the best of both worlds. They get the openness and like all the basically free help that open source provides, while at the same time they get to keep some of their secrets that they value the most.
That is true.
Yeah.
Speaking of Microsoft, and open source and all that, I believe like a lot of the companies were anti open source at the beginning, correct?
Microsoft is the only one that I can think of. For example, I can't remember which CEO it was. It wasn't Bill Gates, and I know it wasn't their current one because their current CEO really supports open source. But I
Yeah.
believe it was in the early 2000s. One of them said that open source is communism, which is well, yeah, quite an edgy statement, to say the least. But
To
Apple,
say
sorry,
said it's very absurd to say that it's communism.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Apple, they don't contribute much to open source. The only one like open source project that they managed I can think of on top of my head would be the Swift programming language. For those of you who don't know, Swift is what is the programming language that is used to make apps for Apple products like Mac, iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, Apple TV. I think that's pretty much it. But yeah, so the Swift programming language itself is open sourced. But I think other than that, I can't think of anything that Apple has contributed to open source. Can you?
To be honest, no, not really.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really follow along Apple's project or what they're working on. It's you know, I don't look like most of the products that I have on Apple, so I don't bother looking into Apple too much. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you're correct about the Swift thing. That is open source.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
oh, also, but if I'm correct, didn't isn't Mac based off of Linux, which is open source?
Li- so it's kind of complicated. So there's Unix, which is sort of like Linux. A long time ago, like in I think it was the 1970s or 80s.
Yeah.
I don't know, but there was Unix, and then there was like someone they basically like copied Unix. The legality of it was very questionable at the time. Like I don't understand it completely, but they basically copied Unix and they made GNU, I think it's called. And then Linux is based off of GNU, but Unix and GNU are basically the same thing. And then Mac, because the Mac had an operating system way before Unix was created. But then they decided to make like redesign the entire Mac OS, and they decided to take Unix and other projects like the Next Tech software from whenever they bought Steve Jobs' company and brought him back into the company, and I believe maybe a few other projects, although I'm not sure. And
Yeah.
that's where like the Mac OS of today comes from. So, there's anything you want to add to that, David?
No, no, I think you covered the base quite a lot.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. So basically, yeah. So yeah, the main reason why people are very like supportive of open source is because you can see for yourself like how private it is. So like it's really respectable of privacy, and also it instead of it just benefiting like the creator of it, it will benefit like the entire community. And there's also some upsides for the owner of the open source project because he gets access to a lot like a way bigger labor pool. Like because there's people from all over who are just like, let's say, bored at home, or even let's say there's another company that depends on your open source project, they'll also contribute to it. Like I said earlier, Microsoft got some of its employees to contribute to Google's Chromium project, even though they're competitors, because they both rely on the same, like, on Chromium, so they both rely on the same open source software. They worked together. So, I mean, yeah, unless if um, there's anything else you want to add, David, I think we should move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We should do that then.
Okay, so I'm thinking, so well, first of all, a lot of us will use open source software, or especially partially open source software, a lot more than we think. So I'm thinking, me and David, we're each going to recommend a piece of software that we use often that's completely open source, or at least completely open source as far as we know. And yeah, so David, how about you go first?
I so I'd like to recommend VS Code. I'm a, from some for from what I've heard slash seen, it seems that VS Code is open source, meaning
Hmm.
that a lot of people has contributed to VS Code. Uh, Basically, VS Code is basically a programming software which allows you to code or write any HTML, CSS script if that's what you like to do, even though it's not coding. But basically, with VS Code, it basically allows you to complete your projects. And from what I've heard slash seen, VS Code is open source, and that's what I like to recommend if you like to code.
Well, I mean, you can do a lot more than HTML and CSS. You can also do
I
JavaScript and Python and stuff.
mean, I did say code. I mean, HTML and CSS isn't coding.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but also I think like to add on to that, um, like you're probably gonna agree here, and a lot of people on the internet do. It's the best free code editor. Do you agree?
I mean, I agree with that statement, but it's obviously subjective, right? I
Yeah.
mean, some people would disagree, others would agree. It's subjective, but from my experience, to me, I'd say yes to me.
Well, I find that whenever you're looking at like just boards, like chat boards on like let's say Reddit for example, a lot of people seem to think that VS Code is the best, and I believe the reason for it is because well, there's a lot of handy shortcuts in VS Code.
Yeah,
Like I find more so than other code editors like let's say brackets.io for example. And also, due to its popularity, there's a lot of extensions you can get. For example, I was working on a website on VS Code, and there was this extension called Live Server where it basically reloads the page, so I don't have to manually reload it all the time, which saved me a lot of time. There's also all kinds of cool themes you can get on it too.
yeah. I also have that extension when I was creating a website. It's
Yeah.
a pretty great extension. There's also, theme adds on, you know, Um, there's also correctors. Like you could say like grammar correctors. Like by that I mean like if there's an error in the code, like, it would basically tell you, even though
Yeah.
VS Code does it themselves, but like it expand upon that.
Yeah. But I still find that even that is sometimes like it's not very descriptive of what your error is.
Yeah, yeah.
Bro,
It turns out most of the error is just a semicolon.
you have no idea how many times I've been writing some code, okay? And then
Yeah,
there's an error that comes up, and then you know how there's a little light bulb for a solution?
yeah, yeah.
And
It
then
says
there,
there's no solutions.
no, no, it literally says that its recommended solution is just to delete the line of code. I'm like, what?
That's why usually like whenever that ever happens, I'm like, I usually just go to the tech community since the tech community is quite open and there's lots of friendly people that are willing to help with your projects.
Yeah,
And I just tend to ask questions to those who are better than me. Like by far no means I'm not the best. I mean, I'm just a kid myself, right? And I'm
yeah,
still learning. And I there's always stuff to learn. And asking questions to someone that are better than me that have some experience, that's great.
yeah. Well, there was actually because me and you were both like beginner programmers,
Yeah.
and I was working on a website where you convert it basically takes your local time zone. Then there's a
Mm.
bunch of cities that like on, and then you can like you can either click or search up a city, and it'll show the local time zone for that city. So like you can kind of like compare your time zone and that city's time zone. And there were certain things I did not know how to do, like for example, make a good search bar was probably my biggest one, but also a few small things. Like and basically because it was completely open source, the website that I was working on, there was a lot of programmers from, I mean, uh, around the world. I found mostly from India, who like were they were very helpful. Like my website would not be what it is today if it wasn't for the open source community.
Wait, is your website currently live? I
Yeah,
mean, you
should
can
I?
put it at the description if you want to,
Yeah, I'll
and
do that. Yeah,
the others could, well, the viewers could check your website.
yeah. I mean, yeah. So a lot of it that the open source community helped me with is stuff that I just simply did not know how to do. Certain things that I could do if I searched it up. I just didn't like have time to do it. And also, they just made took some of my code and they like made it more efficient and run better. If you get what I'm saying? Yeah.
And I've said another great point about open source. It's basically a place where the community has the ability to help each other,
Yeah.
provide a tool for others that also need help.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Like I don't know. I found it like really special, for example, because it was like I don't know. It felt like the first time that I was like really part of the open source community. If you get what I'm saying, right? Because it was like
Yeah,
me and like other people from around the world all working to make like a certain piece of software as best as we can.
that's actually great.
Yeah.
I mean, we're really part of the open source community.
Huh?
I said that like doing that is a great you know example of the open source community because you guys are helping each other.
Yeah. And also, due to it being open source, if anyone wanted to like, let's say, make their own website that was similar, they could just like use the code that like from my project and just use it and like modify it to make their own, or just build on top of it.
Yeah, that is actually true
Yeah.
because like it's not just you who owns the software; it's multiple people
Yeah.
in the website.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, yeah. So I mean, yeah. So a lot of people help me with the website. And if someone wanted to like like make their own and like base it off of mine, they could do that, and like dude, I wouldn't have a problem with it. So
So basically, they can just reskin your whole website if they wanted to.
yeah, yeah. Or let's say they just, well, actually, even let's say they were making like let's say their own website and they want to like include like time in it, for example. Like let's say they I just like let's say they wanted a clock on their website for whatever reason, okay?
Yeah.
Like they could just like take part of my project, the part which determined the local time, and then literally just copy paste it onto their own website if they wanted to. You get what I'm
And
saying?
like, yeah, I get what you mean. So basically, you're saying that uh, if someone wanted to, work on an entirely different new project, right?
Mm-hmm.
But your project had a component that they needed. For example, as you said, time.
Yeah.
They needed a local time, right?
Yeah.
And the website consistently tell what time it is for them locally. Basically, they can literally just take a piece of your code and then put it on their project and tweak it, edit it out so it works on their website
Yeah,
on their
exactly.
project.
Yeah. Because whenever I was making it, I found for time, JavaScript isn't very good at it. So, a lot of it, a lot of the time stuff, you needed to use frameworks, different frameworks for it. But I don't know, I didn't really want to use the frameworks because they seemed complicated. So
Mm-hmm.
I looked at different articles and documents online, and also with the help from the open source community, I was basically able to make a pretty good, I mean, not to pat myself on the back, but it was pretty like good way to for time. Like I know this sounds like stupid for the people listening. Like this guy can't figure out how to like, time. But with or plain JavaScript, there's not that many tools to use. But yeah, with the help of the open source community, I was able to make a pretty decent one for to calculate time.
And that's great.
Yeah.
You know, it helps you complete the project, your goal that you're working on.
Hmm.
There's nothing better than completing something that you really worked hard on.
Yeah.
Eh?
Yeah. And also speaking of open source, um the most popular website basically for open source is called GitHub. So basically, you have all these repositories, which is basically like pieces of software, which are all open sourced. And on GitHub, it's kind of like social media, if you could want to call it that, for open source. So you'll have everyone from, like small, like just individuals like me or you, who are working on a
Mhm.
project and we have it posted on GitHub. And you even have like medium-sized companies, like let's say Mozilla or Brave, up to the big tech giants like Facebook, Apple. I mean, Apple, they only have like Swift on there, but still, Facebook, Alibaba, Microsoft, etc. Google too, who hosts their projects on there, and a bunch of people contribute to. So it's like a big social media just for people to contribute to each other's projects.
Which is great.
Yeah, and one also big advantage of VS Code is that because both VS Code and GitHub are owned by Microsoft, one big advantage is that VS Code has GitHub integration. Because usually, if you want to use, because you can use GitHub with anything, with any code editor, but usually you'd have to use the command line, which isn't that big of a deal. You just have to like take a few hours aside to learn how to use Git on the command line. But let's say you don't want to do that, or you just find it very difficult to, or you're not that dedicated, you can just use the built-in integration with GitHub that VS Code offers.
That's I've actually used that extension quite a lot. Like I've spent time learning GitHub from scratch,
Mm-hmm.
and when I look at the extension versus learning it myself, I'd rather just use the extension because it's a lot easier and it takes a lot less time than actually writing it. Like dot add and then file names, right? Using the extension is far more efficient and easier and faster, which is what I
Mhm.
like about the extension.
Yeah. Well, I usually use the command line version of Git, and the main reason for it is because let's say in the future there's a better code editor. I don't want to be strapped down to VS Code just because I don't know how to use Git on the extension line. If you go or the command line, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I go.
For this, I'm not sure if other code editors have this, but GitHub it'll tell you you'll have a little U beside like your files that you haven't staged or committed yet. Like it'll say you have unsaved changes.
And it's a great. I mean, the reason why it's great is because let's say if you're gonna close the program or anything like that,
Yeah.
like it warns you and tells you like, yo, if you're gonna quit, you might as well commit it and
Yeah.
put it in an area where so you can always rework on it.
Yeah.
And
Um
because of that, we tend to prevent
mhm.
project loss.
Yeah.
I mean, like that has happened to me while I was working on a project, and then ended up forgetting and all that I couldn't like I had to restart from scratch, and that
Damn.
wow, I hate it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think if that's all we have to talk about VS Code, I probably have, I mean, do you want to add anything else?
Actually, I feel like we basically covered a lot of the base when it comes to VS Code.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm probably gonna recommend my software. Um, so basically, I'm my default browser on both my phone and my laptop is Brave. So it's an internet browser, and it's based on Chromium. So like I said earlier, the same thing that Chrome and Microsoft Edge are based off of. So basically, a big advantage of that is that like Google Chrome and Edge, it's very minimalistic and clean. And also, you get access to the Chrome extension store, and the vast majority of them will still work on Brave because the base code is the same as Google Chrome, which I mean is what most of those extensions are made for. So a lot of the extensions I use on Chrome, you'll still be able to use them on Brave. And there's really two very big advantages that Brave has over most other browsers like Chrome and Edge especially. And that is that it's very well, it's the fastest browser out there. And like this is partially from experience and also from like tests that I've done and also other people have done. And it's faster than both Chrome and Safari. I haven't personally tested it against other browsers, but other people have, and they say that it's the fastest browser out there. Um, but yeah, so it's way faster than other browsers, and also I believe, it's the most private browser by default, I believe. Now, by default, I mean if you want the most private browser you can get is what's called hardened Firefox, where you go into Firefox and you change a bunch of settings. But if you want something just, out of the box, that's privacy out of the box by default, Brave is your best option. It blocks a bunch of trackers, like those trackers that follow you around the web. It blocks a lot of them. And yeah, I mean, and now a lot of people they're wondering like how do people make money then if they can't give you targeted ads? And what they did is that they have their own cryptocurrency, and I believe what you can do is that you can choose to see what they consider privacy respecting ads. Now I say choose to see because by default it also has an ad blocker, which I mean I find very helpful. Because whenever I'm on Brave, then I go onto Chrome for like let's say like some reason. Whenever I go on Chrome, for whatever reason that may be, I notice there's so many ads. I mean, David, do you use an ad blocker?
Yeah, yeah. Dude, I hate it. This too much ads.
Yeah.
Like some like a good portion of the ads covers a screen. Like and I'm trying to work, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
trying to look, I'm trying to work, and then just like a random pop up ad and it covers a part of the screen, and it's annoying because
Yeah.
it does that frequently. I'm like, okay, I'm tired of this. It's BS. I'm just gonna use an ad blocker.
Yeah, literally, like there's so when sometimes I'll go to on Chrome for like for different reasons, and I'll go on this like on certain websites, and there's like three, four ads. They cover like a third of the screen, probably more sometimes, and I'm just like, and it just reminds me, I'm like, this is why I use Brave. Like literally, like I just see that I'm like, yeah, this is because it's not only the ads, but sometimes whenever they're loading, it also slow down the website, right?
Yeah, I mean, like from what I remember, I mean, like I remember like when Google was like, yo, if you toss me a website, like and all that, we'll
Mm-hmm.
basically remove the junk and make it load faster. But
Okay.
like, it still runs just as slow as ever.
Hmm.
It's not that fast. They haven't really made a difference. I just feel like it's became possibly more personalized to
Yeah.
those who are viewing ads.
Yeah.
It's it's just, like I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I do approve of ads, but what I mean that like if they want to make money, they should be supported. But like spamming ads 24/7
Yeah.
with pop up, that's annoying.
Yeah. Well, actually, Brave they came up with this was actually pretty good idea. So you can by default you don't there's an ad blocker, so you don't look at ads. But you can choose to turn it off and look at ads which they consider are privacy respecting it. And what they'll do is that they'll give you a portion of the revenue from that ad in the form of a cryptocurrency. They call it BAT. And basically, what it does is that you have this like cryptocurrency, and whenever let's say you want to support a website but you don't want to like see its ads or whatever, like let's say you go on like some website from like a small developer or whatever, and he usually makes money through personalized ads, but you don't want that because you don't want to be tracked. What you can do is that you can give them some of this bat as long as they sign up for it, which I mean Brave has like if you look into statistics it won't show, but it has gone way up in popularity and they're making all kinds of deals with multiple like um internet companies. So basically they can sign up and then they can start receiving the BAT cryptocurrency from their users who use Brave if the users choose to give them that. So I think that's a pretty ingenious way. David, didn't you use BAT before?
Brave. I mean, I have used Brave before. To me, it's quite different from Edge, like Edge Chromium.
Mm-hmm.
Really like Edge Chromium, so I've been staying with Edge Chromium a lot.
Okay.
But Brave is quite nice to use.
Mm-hmm.
For my preference, I don't use it.
Yeah.
But if you really do respect your privacy and all of that, I recommend using. Like I do respect my privacy. Like I just personally like Edge Chromium a lot
Yeah.
compared to others.
Yeah.
Because
So
it doesn't really take that much resources. Also,
yeah.
is Brave's search engine DuckDuckGo?
So out of the box, its default search engine is Google, but obviously you can change this. But one really cool feature I find is that while like out of the box it's Google, whenever you open a private tab it automatically switches to DuckDuckGo. Then whenever you go back and open a normal tab it'll automatically switch back to Google. So I
That's
find
pretty great. Not gonna lie.
sorry.
I said that's actually pretty great. Not going to lie. I mean, the reasoning why it's because I know that like I've used DuckDuckGo a lot. Like I've
Hmm.
used all kinds of different search engines depending on my uses, right?
Hmm.
And DuckDuckGo is a very secure search engine, depending on what you want to do.
Yeah.
And once again, you may be asking, well, how do they make money if they don't, have personalized ads? Well, one of the ways that they make money, from what
Wait,
I've remembered,
is this DuckDuckGo you're talking about here?
DuckDuckGo.
Okay.
What I remember is that, let's say that you're buying an Amazon product. Usually, Amazon products has a referral link, and the person who's buying the product ends up clicking on the referral link, and you make a small commission on that. They end up buying
Okay.
products. Yeah. So basically, that's basically what they've been doing.
Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Okay. So basically, let's say that I'm referring you to this new phone case that's on Amazon, right?
Okay.
Who's with the referral links can like possibly make money, which is like, for example, a lot of big tech company, I mean, not companies, YouTubers, the way that they end up making money is from referrals, right?
Yeah.
The people ends up buying the product via referral link. Because of that, they make a small commission, and the more product they buy from referral links, the more commission that they make.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, it's the main source. Well, not the main source, I think, but like one of the sources of revenue,
Yeah.
just from referral links, and it does so respecting the privacy.
Yeah. Yeah, so to get back to the subject of Brave, so the main reasons I use it on my default browser on my phone and laptop. I used to use it as the default browser on my iPad, but I don't know, there was one update they did and they really screwed it up, and it just started like, I don't know, images wouldn't load properly. It was weird. But yeah, yeah, but on my laptop and my phone it works like really well. So, yeah, the reason why I choose it over other browsers, which are also like pretty good quality, like Edge Chromium, Chrome, and the others, is that has a built-in ad blocker. It's faster than them. It's like a really clean design, like you would expect from other modern browsers, and it's very like privacy focused, and also it's 100% open sourced. So, is there anything else you would like to add on Brave?
Um, Honestly, I just like, you guys should try Brave out. It's a pretty good,
Hmm.
browser. I mean, if you don't like it, stop using it. But
Yeah,
just be open minded and try it out. Like, at first, it does seem complicated, but once you do try it out, you may
yeah.
like it.
No, I think an important note to put in here that I almost forgot to add is if I would not recommend using it on your iPad or iPhone. And the reason for that is because I've used it on my iPad, right? Like I said, I used to use it, and then they made some update where the photos weren't loading properly, which I found very weird. And it just on the iPad at least, it just looks like a bloated version of the phone app. And I have a friend who has an iPhone 7 and he uses Brave on it occasionally, but he says that it's always freezing on him. And once I was with him and he was using it, and it just kept freezing on him and I don't know why. So yeah, so that is important to note. While I do think Brave is the best browser out there, I wouldn't use it if you have an iPhone or iPad. So yeah, but on Mac, Windows, Android, I haven't tried it on Linux, but yeah, but at least on Windows, Mac, and Android, it's been working very well for me. So yeah, with that out of the way, what should we get on to next, David?
Um, I feel like we can talk about companies, well, like embracing open source.
Yeah,
I mean, I like a lot of companies back then weren't open source, well, were anti open source, and they hated it.
yeah,
I think that, like, of course times has changed, right?
Hmm.
That a lot of those anti open source companies has become open source, right? I mean, has supported open source, which is a great thing, right? Which obviously made the public images go up
Yeah.
in England. Like, for example, I'm gonna use Microsoft because it's one of the most popular known companies that were anti open source, right?
Yeah.
As soon as they started supporting open source, its public image went up, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people hated Microsoft.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The whole antitrust case and everything.
Yeah, and all that stuff. And because the based open source even actually acquired GitHub
Yeah.
to that they like open source,
Hmm.
it says a lot about that company. Like it shows that they obviously value people, and that you know people sorry, lost of train of thought. Okay, so they obviously value people, right?
Hmm.
And that they value that anyone has the ability to contribute or help someone else if they want to.
Yeah.
And I think that's nice because once again it's open source and a lot of people has the ability to view what they're working on, and that itself excites a lot of people because
Yeah.
like some people just want to work on big tech companies open source project, because it gives them meaning, like it makes them happy, like it's something that they can be proud of. It's like, oh crap, I ended up working on this piece of thing that Microsoft or any company was working on, and
Yeah.
I made the difference.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, whenever you go on, like, let's say something like really big, like, uh, I don't know, as soon as I'm on the spot, I'm having a hard time thinking of an example.
That's a train of thought.
Yeah, yeah, so like whenever you go on something like, let's say, Brave, for example, we'll just take that because we just talked about it. If you contribute to Brave and let's say you fix a bug within the browser, and then like let's say a few days from then you go on the browser and you notice that the bug is fixed, like there's a lot of pride because you're like, I fixed something that a lot of people have a problem with. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. Like, I exactly get what you mean.
Yeah.
Like, it makes you happy. It's like I worked on something that's being used and it's useful. I
Hmm.
brought value to a product.
Yeah. But as you were saying, Microsoft, yeah, because Microsoft is a very interesting study because they were very unpopular in the 90s and the 2000, like early 2000s. But then they had their new CEO come in. His name is, hold on. Yeah, I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Satya Nadella. And basically, what he did is that he decided he wants to change the public image that Microsoft has. So he embraced open source community by acquiring GitHub. And also something else very interesting they did is that instead of starting to resent Linux, he embraced it because like cloud storage like AWS, Google Cloud and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so Microsoft's cloud storage used to always their servers used to always run Windows. Now, while Windows is, a pretty decent operating system, I mean, everyone has their opinion on it, but it's a pretty decent, desktop operating system. For a server, it's just not that efficient for like, doing server stuff. Most people would use Linux for servers because it's much more efficient. So what Satya Nadella did is that he started developing uh, basically a new distribution of Linux called Azure, and like apparently it's supposed to be super secure from what I understand. Like they invested a lot of resources inside of it, and it's supposed to be super secure. They had all kinds of bug bounties to like cover up like every like almost every patch, and I believe it's the second biggest cloud storage like platform next to AWS, of course.
That's great.
Yeah. So yeah, so he's done work on Linux, and he's well, like you said, he acquired GitHub, and also I mean this next part doesn't really have to do as much with open source, but it just goes to show how Microsoft has opened up. Like they've done all kinds of things. Like for example, VS Code, you don't like even though it's owned by Microsoft, you don't need a Windows computer to run it. You can also run it on Mac and Linux, which are obviously like fierce competitors with Microsoft Windows. And also, for they made their Microsoft Office suite. They actually optimized it to work well on mobile devices of like iOS and Android, and work really well on the laptop on the iPad, which before is something that they just didn't do because their idea was if you want to use Microsoft Office, use a Windows computer. But now they're like, oh no, you can use it on you can use it on your iPhone, your Android, your iPad, and even on your Mac if you want to. So I mean, Microsoft Office is not open source, but I think it really goes to show how far Microsoft has opened up.
And that is a great thing because every single company that has opened up,
Hmm.
a lot of success has, happened to them.
Yeah,
Those companies and their public opinions, has become a lot more positive, a lot more good, a lot more great, actually.
yeah. I
A
mean,
lot of people tend to trust those companies a lot more.
yeah. Like I find like whenever you think of Microsoft, people usually have one of two opinions. Either they'll hate it because of the antitrust and all that, or they'll love it because of all the contributions it's recently made to open source.
I mean, lately, I'd say a lot of people has been liking Microsoft a lot more than hating.
Yeah, yeah. At least a lot of people in the tech community, because let's like most people who let's say like aren't inside the tech community, all they'll think about is like the antitrust case. But inside the tech community, they've definitely been gaining a lot more popularity.
And yeah, that is true. That is true.
Yeah. So let's go on to Facebook. Now, Facebook, they do a lot of contribution to open source, and
Mhm.
one that's really interesting, and I'm probably gonna learn to code for it, is called React Native. Now, what's so interesting about React Native is that usually, if you wanted to make an app and you wanted to release it on like let's say many different platforms, you'd have to learn or get a group of people who know a bunch of different programming languages. Like, for example, if you want to release it, this is just as an example on Windows, iOS, and Android, you would need to know three different languages. For iOS, you would need to know Swift. For Android, you'd have to know either Java or Kotlin. And then for Microsoft or for Windows, if you wanted to run like just natively, I believe it's C sharp, their official language, although I could be wrong about that. But basically, what React Native does is that they made a type of JavaScript, like a modified version of JavaScript, which they call React. Like with this open source framework called React Native, you can write in React, and basically what it'll do is that it'll work on iOS, Android, and I believe also Windows too. It's really good because instead of learning a bunch of different languages, you only need to learn React, and you can write, I think it's like over 90% of your app inside React, and it'll work on iOS, Android, and I believe Windows too, maybe even the web. I read something about that. Either it already works on the web, or they're planning on releasing it to work on the web. Yeah, so React Native is very helpful because it lets you output new features a lot faster than if you had to do it like you had to type it separately for each one of the different platforms.
Mhm. Like, this may be random to say, like a lot of the companies that has embraced open source, I do appreciate them a lot.
Yeah.
Like 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 a lot of people has a negative perception of Facebook,
Yeah.
but you have to give them props for being trying their best to be open source, trying their best to be good.
Yeah, well, that's why me personally, I have a mixed view of Facebook because while I mean, in my opinion, it just collects way too much data on people. Like, even if you don't use Facebook or any of their products, just because they have so many deals with different, like developers and companies all across the web, you're still going to be tracked, which is, I mean, a problem that we touched on in our last podcast. But on the other hand, I mean, like, there's so many people where the only way they have in touch with their family members and old friends is through Facebook or like WhatsApp or one of the other Facebook products. I mean, you can't really put a price on that because like you're talking to people that you haven't seen in a while or who might live overseas. Like you really can't like you can't put a price tag on that because it's basically priceless. And also, like you said, there's so many open source projects that they've helped with. React Native, in my opinion, being the most important, that they've really like given back to the community. So that's why I have a mixed perception of Facebook.
Yeah, and to touch on the thing that you said about collecting data, like most of its users, like
Hmm.
are basically average daily people,
Yeah.
and most of them I'd say wouldn't know or wouldn't think it's that much of a big deal,
Hmm.
even though it is a big deal
Yeah.
that getting so much information on us. Like if you probably tried asking, for to download the information that they have on you, like I feel
Hmm.
like it come back and like in a huge file size.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And
Yeah. I mean, I know.
I mean,
For
not that.
Google. Sorry.
And I said I know that's not that great.
Yeah.
To that.
Well, I know for Google, on the average person, they have, I believe it's 5 gigabytes of data, maybe 10. 'Cause people know that from down their data. But if you're someone like me, for example, or someone who, I mean, I don't own a Pixel phone, but I use a lot of Google like services. But yeah, if you use a lot of Google services or you own a Pixel phone or something, like you can expect like 15 or maybe even 20 gigabytes of data whenever you do download my data, which I mean, if you think about it, phones from like a few years ago, their base storage was 15 gigabytes of data. And whenever you take into account that Google has that much information on just one person, it's kind of crazy.
Really is kind of crazy though.
I mean, yeah, I mean, that's a lot of data. And whenever you take into account that, like, a lot of it, I mean, at least for probably the case of Google, is just like text and code, then, like, I mean, that's a lot of stuff.
Like to be honest, like sometimes I wonder what most of these companies are doing with their data. I mean, like, don't you ever wonder that too?
Yeah, exactly, which is why open source is so important and like why we're making this podcast. Because instead of wondering if the company is completely open source, you can just go and look for yourself, assuming obviously that you have the technical knowledge to do so.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but yeah,
I everyone should be a lot more knowledgeable when it comes to like things like these, because like it is important. Like if more people pinpoint the people's wrongdoing, and that doesn't mean cancel. It means like call them out and be like, yo, that ain't good.
yeah,
So you guys should chill out on that. But I don't think like a whole company should be split up because of that. I mean, like when it comes to Facebook, like some
hmm,
people want them to be split and things like that.
yeah,
And I trust a lot. Like I'm pretty neutral. Like I'm like from my point of view, it sucks a lot to see a company that you worked on get split quite easily, just
yeah,
because most people have a negative opinion on you just because of their
yeah.
collection.
But on the other end, though, they are quite monopolistic. Like you, when most people, whenever they think of Facebook, they're like, oh no, it's not a monopoly. They only own Facebook. But a lot of people don't realize that they also own WhatsApp
Like,
and
what
Instagram. Huh?
Instagram and said Instagram and WhatsApp.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like Facebook alone is big, but it's not a monopoly. But whenever you add in Instagram and WhatsApp, then there's a whole, like, it paints a different picture.
Yeah, like okay, let's say that they end up getting split up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, like, here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna be honest. I'm pretty sure. Well, I believe that Instagram may become the next Facebook, as big as Facebook, or even bigger, and acquire Facebook itself if it wanted to.
You think so?
I do think so.
Yeah.
Like a lot. Like, let's be honest. It's like Facebook is okay, but like most people from newer generations don't really go
Mm,
on Facebook because
yeah.
it's kind of old. It's like kind of using MySpace, you know?
Yeah. Well, actually, there's something really interesting that I've noticed. Um, in the West here, you're right. Most young people that I know don't even have a Facebook account. They use Instagram. But if you look at developing countries like let's say India and Eastern Europe, for example, most people, including young people, use Facebook as their main thing. They don't use Instagram, which is something that I found very interesting. So,
Yeah, region does influence it a lot. Like if the majority of the people ends up using Facebook, right? You don't own Facebook. I mean, don't have Facebook. And obviously, you're gonna be like, why don't you? People are gonna be like, why don't you have Facebook? Just get Facebook, you know? Like
yeah,
it's
yeah, it's this whole like social thing. Like, I
yeah.
mean, yeah, like that's basically what happened over here. Like, a small group of people ended up getting Facebook because it was better than MySpace. And then people
Mm.
like, oh, this is like, so like cool and stuff. So then a bunch of other people got it, and then it got to the point where almost everyone has Facebook.
I mean, yeah. I mean, at first it did start
Yeah,
only for universities, right? From what I remember, first the only people at first who were allowed to use it were university students,
yeah.
and then it grew to the point that millions of people were using and going on that platform on a daily basis.
Yeah. I mean, well, billions even.
Oh,
Huh.
possibly, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's something like I believe it's something like 2 billion Facebook's accounts or something. It could be more even.
Which shows that like how Facebook is popular and how much importance that it has on people's lives, like how much impact it has on people's lives. Like as Facebook said, like, its main business line, well, that like Zuckerberg said, is that their goal is to make it easier and more accessible to communicate with those
Yeah.
around the globe.
I mean, yeah. For example, WhatsApp. I mean, if you use WhatsApp, like all you need to do is have the other person's phone number. And I mean, it's super easy. Like, you don't even have to make an account for WhatsApp. I was actually surprised on how easy it was to set up. Like, it took like seconds. And basically, you can text with anyone anywhere in the world without paying for overage fees. Because, like, like long distance fees, I mean. Because it's all through Wi Fi. And it's completely encrypted too.
Which
So,
is great.
yeah. Now, I want to keep talking about this, but we're kind of running short on time. So we should go to the other big contributor on open source, which is Google. Now, Google, I think their biggest contribution to open source would be Chromium. What do you think?
Um, yeah, I agree with that statement too.
Yeah,
Do you think why I agree with that statement is because a lot of other big tech companies uses Chromium for a
yeah,
lot of those
yeah,
products.
Yeah, like well, I mean, Microsoft Edge would be the biggest example.
Well, Microsoft Edge Chromium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the new one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
which
also, sorry, go on.
yeah, as I was saying, which like which is cool, good. I mean, like let's be honest here. Edge HTML, it's not that good.
No, it's really not. It's slow, big security goals. Sorry, big
Yeah,
security holes, and
yeah. I mean, like when Microsoft Edge Chromium wasn't out, like I'd use Google Chrome or
yeah,
other browser. As soon as Microsoft Edge Chromium, like Microsoft Edge Chromium is still in beta, right? But even though it's in beta, I still go actively and try to download it
I think it's
just to
out
use it.
of beta now, though.
Is it?
I think so. I could be wrong. Wait,
Give me a
hold
sec.
on.
Check.
Hold on. I gotta pause this for a second. Oh, okay. Sorry for that interruption again. So we're gonna we were talking about Chromium, right, David?
We were talking about Chromium.
Yeah. So
Um,
go ahead.
we were talking about how a lot of the companies, big tech companies, are embracing Chromium into
Hmm.
the browsers, such as like Microsoft, Brave, and you said Firefox before.
No, no. Firefox, they have their own. I think they call it the Gecko engine.
Gecko
But
engine.
yeah,
Gecko.
yeah. But yeah. I mean, the browsers I can think of would be well, for Chromium, Google Chrome, obviously. The new Microsoft Edge, Brave, Opera, and Vivaldi. Uh, I mean, yeah. I mean, those are five browsers I can think of. But yeah, um, I think we should really get a move on because we're kind of running out of time here. So we
Hmm.
have three more subjects to talk about. The AOSP, which is short for Android Open Source Project, Linux, and you wanted to talk about Discord open source projects. So let's
Yeah,
start
yeah.
with that last one. So
Discord.
sorry?
I was okay. So basically, Discord open source projects. Um, oh, Discord, uh, like it's pretty. Discord is a very open source site, and there are multiple developers, uh, like part of Discord that was then open source. Right.
Okay.
For example, they support webhooks from GitHub
Okay.
as well as Slack.
Okay.
Um, um, Discord has a couple committed open source projects. From the top of my head, well, wait, looking online, it seems like they host many open source projects such as UPick,
Okay.
React, React Iflex. Not sure how to pronounce that,
Okay, I'm
and many other
guessing
ones.
React Iflec is probably off branch of React Native. I'm guessing.
Possibly, I'm not sure though. Yeah, they have multiple Discord basis open source,
Okay.
which
For
is great. I mean, it's one of the great many reasons why it makes the platform pretty good.
yeah.
Like like I mean, like it still has bugs.
Oh
It
yeah.
still has issues. Like like it's, for a free platform, for a free program, it's still one of the best out there.
Well, what I've noticed a lot with open source projects, especially like the very bleeding edge ones, like I'm talking about the ones like where there's not even a download button. Like you have to go into the GitHub documentation
Hmm.
to figure out how
Yeah.
to install it. A lot of the very bleeding edge open source projects, I find that they have way cooler features than any proprietary stuff has, but it's not as stable. Do you agree with that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I do agree. I
Yeah.
mean, like it's very buggy or glitchy.
Yeah. I believe the reason for that is because a lot of it is just like uh people who program as a hobby, right? Like
Yeah.
a big chunk of the open source community, it's just people who program as a hobby. And whenever you're coding, it's much more fun to code new features or improve existing features than to fix bugs. So I mean that's why I believe that a lot of the open source, like I'm not saying that open source is like buggy mess. A lot of it is pretty decent software, but a lot of the very very bleeding edge stuff is quite buggy.
I
No,
mean, it's harder to find bugs than than adding new features.
yeah, and it's also much more fun to add new features.
Yeah, like it's just, like bug hunting isn't the type of thing like I want to spend hours on. I mean, I
Hmm.
would have to, but I don't
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah, but then that's not to say that open source projects are very buggy because there's always people who will fix the bugs. Like there's also a good amount of people inside the open source community where that's what they do. They just fix bugs. But yeah, a lot of the very like bleeding edge stuff is has a lot of bugs. Now, I'm not saying that Discord is like super like bleeding edge. It is, a pretty cool app. But I don't know. I feel like there could be another reason why it's so buggy. Could you think of another reason?
They're improving it as they
Yeah.
add new features. There are going to be more bugs. For example, like screen sharing, right?
Yeah.
You know, obviously, for example, Skype, right? When you
Yeah.
screen share on Skype, it's not the best, and there are always going to be issues when it comes to
Mhm.
like platforms like Discord, Skype, TeamSpeak. But for a free program, you have to admit that is one of the best for a free program. And you may be wondering how they make the money. They have a subscription plan. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, the subscription plan, like it's decent, right? Like
Mhm.
it's a very similar to the free program, which means like like if you really want to support the developers, you can do that.
Yeah.
It's basically what the subscription plan is.
Yeah. Also, it is important to note that bugs aren't like they're not unique to open source programs. There's a lot of proprietary stuff that are riddled with bugs. If I
I
could
mean,
go ahead.
for example, I did mention Skype before, right? I
Yeah.
believe Skype isn't open source, but it is filled with bugs.
Yeah. Examples I can think of. I can think of three on top of my head, and they're actually free operating systems. Um,
Mhm.
and that would be uh, iOS 13, macOS Catalina, and to a certain extent Windows 10 too. Like you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
Like
Like,
macOS Catalina, like literally, apparently, like it's pretty buggy. Now I got it in whenever it was in its later stages, but at the beginning, apparently people were having massive problems with it. And same thing with iOS 13. It got better over time, but at the beginning, people were having big problems with it. But yeah, so and I mean, like I said, Apple is very a lot of their software is proprietary. So like including iOS 13 and macOS Catalina. Oh yeah, interestingly enough, specifically because of how buggy iOS 13 and macOS Catalina were, Apple like created a entirely new process on how they write code just to avoid bugs like that in the future.
can you tell us one of the many few bugs that has happened on iOS 13 and Catalina?
Me, I only I on like I haven't had that big of bugs on Mac OS Catalina, for example. Sometimes I mean it's been fixed, but before it wouldn't create time machine backups properly, which for those of you who don't know, it's whenever like you back up your system in case something would happen to it so you can restore it. So for a little while, I could not make backups on Time Machine, but I got that fixed. And on my
Uh-huh.
iPad, which was running iPad OS 13, which is basically iOS 13, there was a really weird glitch where the dock at the bottom with like all the app icons at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, yeah.
Whenever let's say I would like swipe to a different page like on my home screen, the dock would disappear.
That's a very weird bug, I say.
Yeah, I know it is. But as soon as I like restart my iPad, it just works very fine. But I got off easy, my guy. Okay, like some of the stuff that you've heard about iOS Catalina, some I heard stories of some people, like apparently this happened in the early versions. You know how there's like a pop-up like to sign into your Apple ID?
Hmm?
Apparently in like
Yeah.
apparently in the early versions of macOS Catalina, and these are like this isn't the beta versions. These are like the like final versions. There was people were getting annoyed because every few minutes the computer would ask them to sign into their Apple ID even though they were already signed in. Like some people, like as much as every 2 minutes, they would get like a pop-up asking them to sign into their Apple ID. Like
That's
that's
that'd be very annoying.
oh yeah, like there was one person he put a screenshot and he had like 9 of those pop-ups within like 15 minutes or so or something like that. But I mean, yeah, that's been fixed, thank God. And yeah, so hopefully future versions of iOS and macOS aren't going to be like that because of their new system. Okay, so now we're gonna move on. Now that we finished talking about Discord open source projects, let's go on to Linux and AOSP. So, let's start with Linux because that's a lot
Okay.
more. I mean, yeah, a lot more people are familiar with that.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, so a lot more people are familiar with Linux. So, but for those of you who don't, it's a desktop operating system. It can also be used on servers, like we mentioned earlier. A lot of companies use Linux on their servers, but it can also be used as a desktop operating system, and it is completely open sourced. Meaning that you can modify it as much as you want. I think I mentioned this in the last podcast. There's apparently some people what they've done is that because it's so lightweight and you can customize it, they have their entire desktop on a USB, and like their entire computer and all like files and stuff and settings is all saved onto a USB. Then they can just carry that around. Then whenever they want access to their computer, they just plug it into a laptop or a desktop computer or something, and they do what's called a live boot, which is where instead of installing it onto the computer, it just runs it off the USB. Then they basically have their desktop wherever they are. So yeah, and also Linux also has other cool features. I believe they call this one memory swap, where basically if the computer doesn't have enough RAM to do whatever task is at hand, it'll start using some of the storage as it'll swap some of the storage and start using it as RAM temporarily for it can finish the task, which is something I find very interesting. And yeah, it's because it's completely open source, you can customize it as much as you want, really. So Dave, do you have anything else you want to mention about Linux?
I personally do not use Linux a lot.
Yeah,
I've heard lots of great things about Linux.
yeah,
It's mostly if you're mainly a developer, I feel like Linux would be great for you.
yeah,
If you're mainly a developer, because like from a regular point of view, Linux would be hard to use since you would
yeah,
actually have to how to use Linux. But if you're willing to actually put in the work and or effort
yeah.
to work anything with Linux, then I'd say it's ultimately worth it.
Well, I know like its most practical use is on a server. Due to the amount of customization, you can customize it to take as much like you can customize it exactly for what you want. So let's say you're gonna have a server, which let's
Mm-hmm.
say stores video files or something.
Yeah.
You can customize it to be as efficient as storing video files as you want and get rid of everything that you don't want that would take up like power basically or space. And also for the desktop use, so a lot of people use it simply for the privacy because a lot of people don't trust Mac OS or Windows, especially Windows, with their data. So what they'll do is that they'll use Linux where they can see exactly what kind of information it is collecting. And if they don't like how much information it's collecting or what kind of information it's collecting, due to the open source nature of Linux, they can just, change it and stop sending that information. And also, if after hearing this you're interested in Linux, and using it for your desktop OS, a very good one for beginners is Linux Mint. And the reason for
Mm.
that is because it has a graphical user interface, meaning that it's like you can like see stuff and you can use the mouse and stuff. It's not entirely command line. And it's also set up a lot like Microsoft Windows is. So they say so Linux Mint is basically like the best Linux version for beginners.
Like I recommend the viewers um, to try it out to see, if you like it, to try to learn it, because if you do expect your privacy, know that you guys should check it out and see
Yeah.
if you like it or not.
Yeah, I mean really the only reason I would say not to use Linux would be that there's some software that just isn't available on Linux. For example, Microsoft Office is not available on Linux. I've heard some people say that with some tweaking you can get it to work, but from what I understand, for the most part, it won't run on Linux. Other two popular things that won't run on Linux would be Adobe Photoshop, which a lot of like editors will use, and also a lot of video editing software like Adobe Premiere Pro, and actually the entire Adobe suite won't work on Linux. So yeah, so if you use Adobe software or you use Microsoft Office a lot, then I wouldn't recommend you get Linux. But a lot of the other software works on Linux. For example, well, what we're using right now to speak to each other for this podcast, Discord. Discord works on Linux. You can get Discord on Linux. You can get Google Chrome on Linux. You can get Brave on Linux. Lots of other software like Chrome Remote Desktop also works on Linux. A lot more software than you'd expect would work on Linux. In fact, David, do you know if Steam works on Linux?
I believe it does.
Hold on, I'm gonna search it up right now.
Doing that right?
Yeah, Linux.
Yeah, it is on Linux.
So a lot of software that's very popular does run on Linux. Like the only big like apps or the only big products that people usually use that I can think that don't run would be Adobe and Microsoft Office. But other than that, I mean, yeah, it's pretty good. Discord works, Google Chrome, Brave, Steam, Chrome Remote Desktop. A lot of stuff does work quite well on Linux.
Yeah,
So,
that is. There are some programs that don't work on Linux,
yeah,
but it does work on the main program.
yeah.
Main focus.
But I mean, even then, if obviously if your computer has the specs to support it, there's also you can use a program like a virtual machine program, which also work on Linux. Or you can just dual boot your computer. So you can either use a virtual machine to virtualize Windows 10, or dual boot Windows 10 on your computer. So then, if you need to use Microsoft Office or the Adobe suite of software, then you just boot up Windows 10 and you use it for that. And then whenever you're done, you just go back onto your Linux distribution. So I mean, yeah, Linux is quite useful. Obviously, like David said, you have to learn how to use it. But I mean, yeah, there's a lot more stuff that you can run on it than most people would think.
No,
So
that is true. That is true.
yeah, I mean that's my part. If you want to add anything, you can go ahead, and if not, we'll just start talking about AOSP.
Um, I think we did cover a lot of the base when it comes to Linux.
Yeah.
That basically it's that you have to learn it,
Hmm.
and that some programs are not on Linux
Yeah.
compared to on Microsoft and Mac.
Yeah. Also, I want to tell people, don't be too intimidated whenever it comes to learning Linux, because Linux Mint does a very good job with their graphical user interface, which a lot of people will refer to as GUI. Um, so yeah, so like let's say you decide to try Linux, like there's a ton of like Reddit boards out there and like all kinds of like online communities, um, that'll help you out. And yeah, so I just don't want people to be too intimidated whenever it comes to learning Linux.
Yeah,
So
I'll said it there. Like it is very intimidating, but don't quit. Just keep learning it,
yeah,
and it be worth it.
yeah, actually, hold on. Yeah, so I think we should go on to the next one, which is Android open source project. So for those of you who don't know, um, Android open source project is like the bare bones of what Android is. So you know how I said that actually wait, David, you know how earlier I asked you what you think Google's most important open source contribution is?
Yeah,
And we said it was Chromium?
yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to change my answer to Android open source project now that I think about it too.
I mean that does make sense because
Yeah.
like a lot of phones has
Yeah.
Android uses that.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna explain very quickly. So like a lot of Google products, like earlier we mentioned, Chrome has like two components. There's Chromium, which is open source. Then there's the proprietary Google software on top of it. Android works in a very similar way. So you have the base of it, which is the Android open source project, AOSP for short. Then on top of that, you have the proprietary Google software. And together that makes stock Android, which is what will run on Pixel phones and also Android One phones, I believe. Now, also a lot of manufacturers, they'll add their own skin on top of that. Like Samsung adds One UI on top of that, and Huawei they'll add their EMUI on top of it. But yeah, so you have Android is kind of like um a sandwich kind of. At the very base, you have you have at the very base you have the Android open source project, which is open source as it says in the name. Then you have the proprietary Google software on top, which makes up stock Android. Then you'll have the manufacturer skin. So basically, like I said earlier, with open source, anyone can take it and use it as a building block for their own project. So a lot of people have done this. David, are you familiar with the Amazon Fire Phone?
Oh, I've heard of it. Like all I'm aware is that that end up flopping.
Hmm.
Like it didn't do too well.
Yeah. Well, the Android Fire Phone was actually based off of the Android open source project. So because it's open source, it's free to use and you can use it as a building block for your own. But Amazon, they wanted their own operating system and they didn't want to pay Google for to use their proprietary software. So what they did is that they took AOSP and they made their own software, like they built their own software on top of it.
Honestly, I would have loved to see what new phone, well, the new Amazon phone would have been like.
Yeah, well, I think they did come out with it, to be honest.
They,
I think so. But yeah, it flopped because I don't know. I guess it was because I'm not sure if you know what GMS is.
No, I don't know what that is.
So it's short for Google Mobile Services, and inside the proprietary software that is on that Google sells as part of like the full Android, it has like things like Google Maps, Gmail, and other things built in. And a big problem is that if you if you don't use that proprietary software that Google has, a lot of other apps won't work, including third-party apps like Uber and Lyft would be the first examples that come to mind. Because they use the APIs to connect to like Google Maps would be the case for Uber and Lyft. So they use those APIs that come within GMS in order to just get their apps working. So I think that is the biggest reason why Fire Phone flopped, because even though most apps should theoretically work because it's also because the Fire OS, I think is what it's called, was based off of AOSP, but because a lot of third-party apps rely on GMS, just their apps didn't work properly on Fire phones.
Hmm. It's honestly, so basically, it sounds like you're forced to sign into Google. Use the
Yeah, a lot of apps won't work if you don't buy Google's proprietary software.
That's pretty yikes. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, it is, but there are still some pretty cool things happening within AOSP, and one I really wanted to talk about was Graphite OS. Now, I'm not I the first reason I talk about it is because I was talking in a Discord server and someone was really trying to push me to get this. Like someone like it's called Graphite OS, and apparently it only runs on Pixel phones. But yeah, someone was really pushing me to get this. I didn't end up getting it because I bought a Samsung's phone instead of a Pixel phone. But I found it really interesting. So basically, what Graphite OS is that it's built off of AOSP, and it doesn't use the GMS like proprietary software. So what it does is that it's supposed to be the most privacy focused phone ever, like a completely de-googled phone, which is funny because it's made off of Android, which is, you know, Google owned. But yeah, so what they did is that they took the AOSP and then they put their some other open source software on top of it to make an extremely private phone. And I mean, it's it's supposed to be extremely good for your privacy. The only problem is that without GMS, once again, a lot of apps won't work. And obviously, you'd lose access to apps like Gmail, the Google Play Store, Google Maps, and stuff like that. So I'm interested to see what you think about Graphite OS.
I personally believe that it is quite nice knowing that it's taking up privacy, very secure and
Yeah,
seriously, and that it doesn't try to take advantage of it either.
yeah,
And I believe you've mentioned that it is open source as well.
yeah. I believe it's open source. I could be wrong.
Okay, okay. And for Amazon Firefox,
Fire
um,
Fire Phone, David. Firefox is the
Firefox,
browser.
Firephone, Firephone. My bad.
Yeah,
But yeah, it is quite disappointing knowing that it didn't get to live much.
yeah,
Like, like I would love to try the phone at least once.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know. Personally, I didn't find it super interesting. But yeah, I mean, the more choice in the market, the better. If you get what I'm saying.
I mean, yeah, because it makes it more competitive. When it's more competitive, better
Yeah,
products stands out a lot more.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, but AOSP, I think it's a very interesting case study because
Hmm.
while the majority of the Android phones do buy GMS on top of their, just the normal Android open source project, But there's also certain interesting case studies like Graphite OS, for example, or the Fire Phone. And in fact, I believe there was a Chinese company. They came out with, I think it's called FunTouch OS, which is
Mm-hmm.
also built on top of AOSP. Although FunTouch OS could just be a skin on top of regular Android, but I believe it is completely different from the proprietary Android, and it's built on
Okay.
top of AOSP instead.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. That makes. Okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So, is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
In general, I just want to embrace and say that I love open source,
Mm-hmm.
and that every company that embraces open source is generally taking a step to become a good company.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you agree with the statement?
Yeah, I agree. Cause like especially in the programming community, it's seen as a lot more like friendly, if you get what I'm saying. Because it's because like you're not like because you gotta understand a lot of these companies have to fight hard to keep up their public image because
Yeah.
they're I mean some of them like Apple for example is trillions of dollars. Now Apple doesn't do open source much, but even a lot of the other companies like Facebook and Google, they have an antitrust case over their heads and stuff like that. And yeah, so basically like they're trying to give back to the community in a way because I mean like I said other people can use open source projects like even you know how I told you about React Native.
Yeah. I
Apparently
remember.
part of Pinterest, which is a direct competitor to Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, so therefore it's a competitor to Facebook. Even Pinterest uses part of their app is written in React and they use React Native. So
Hmm.
like they're kind of like giving back, for example, and like same thing with Microsoft and Google. They don't like each other at all. Yet both their browsers are still built on top of Chromium, so they still have to work together in order to make Chromium better to make both their apps better or both their web browsers better. So it kind of like brings the community together, for example.
Yeah. I mean, some of the community, well, tech community is divided,
Hmm.
but it is nice to see that more like loads of tech companies, even though they don't like each other, they're still willing to work with each other
Yeah,
and give back to the community.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, this is very interesting, really. Um, I can't think of a programmer that who doesn't like open source. Like just to put it simply, like I don't really know anyone who like does not like open source. Like I'm pretty sure like almost everyone in the tech community enjoys open source.
I mean, yeah, I mean it'd be hard to find that one person, mainly because like if you would we want if you want help like with the program, we're forced to go on like GitHub or Stack Overflow
Yeah.
or any like other tech like communities just to receive help.
Hmm.
I mean, if you ever asked help, then you I guess you may not really care about open source. But like, if you obviously coded, then you've obviously had to have asked for help at least once.
Oh, more than once, way more than
Yeah,
once.
yeah. I know for sure. Like I was just saying, like if you've coded, like you've had to like it's guaranteed that you've asked for help more than once.
You know what I find amazing though?
Or
Um, so you gotta like, you know how a lot of the programming languages of today are a lot easier to learn and use than let's say like from like the 60s or 50s or something, right?
yeah,
Just because the development over time. But like it's hard enough to program today. But imagine what, let's say, for example, Bill Gates had to go through to learn programming. Like there was no internet in that time, and the programming community was way smaller. And on top of that, things were just generally harder to learn. So I mean, I can't imagine what like how hard it was for them to become good programmers, like the people inside Bill Gates' time or even
I
before
mean,
that.
I mean, from documents that I've read, Bill Gates isn't that much of a good programmer, but he is
Holy
programming.
shit, David. That's
No,
harsh.
no,
That's harsh.
no. I'm not saying he's bad. That's not what I'm saying. Like I'm talking about like based on things that read, based on things that I've read, like news articles and shit like that. Like he's a good programmer. Like I remember watching this one YouTube tutorial where he spoke about if statements.
Okay.
I yeah, and I like that YouTube tutorial. It was pretty great. I mean, it gave me a basic fundamental understanding of what if statements are, and I appreciate that a lot. I was just saying, like, that's like saying, Mark Zuckerberg is a good programmer. Like, he's not really a good programmer. Like, he knows how to code, but like, there are better programmers out there.
I don't think anyone would make it this far into the podcast. But if there is someone, I'm just waiting for them to go into the comment section, just like, what the fuck do you know criticizing these guys, Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg? What the fuck have you done? You fucking beginner.
I mean, I'm
Uh,
still learning. I'm not the greatest programmer. I wouldn't call myself good, but I'm still learning. I mean, I'm still a kid. I still got time to learn. So.
you fucking noob. What are you doing criticizing Bill Gates?
I mean, I'm not the one who criticized them. I'm just talking about stuff that I read.
You're just agreeing
Like,
with them. But
I'm not agreeing. I'm just seeing a lot of reoccurring information that seems to randomly keeps popping up. So I'm gonna assume that it turns out to be true.
Okay.
That they're not really the greatest programmers out there, but they're still good, independent coders themselves. Especially Mark Zuckerberg. He's not that good of a coder, but he's a coder. He knows how to code.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. No, if you know a lot about the Facebook story, he coded like what was it like what he coded something at Harvard in like a very short amount of time, right? And it was super popular. I don't exactly remember what it was.
It's basically like where you would have to like pick between one person and another.
Oh
Like
yeah,
you were
now
basically rating people.
yeah. I remember
Who to
seeing that.
smash or some shit like that.
Yeah, I remember seeing that on the Social Network movie.
I thought that was pretty great.
I mean, I don't know. It's extremely fucked up, but yeah, it's extremely screwed up, but it is impressive how he put it together in like what, one night or something. I think it was. Was it one night?
I think maybe, not sure.
I don't know, but it was extremely screwed up, the ideas behind it. I just don't want to make that clear.
I mean, yeah, I do agree with that statement.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, we went a little bit longer than I expected. So I think we should end it here. So any last thoughts before we go, David?
Make sure to, try out Linux and every single thing that we mentioned on the podcast.
Okay, maybe not every single thing. Calm down, my guy.
I don't know, man. But yeah, please do check out the things that we've mentioned, if possible, if you can. And also have a great day.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching the podcast.
Yeah, have a great day, everyone. Bye.